Hello, sweet souls. Welcome to Purity and Power. Welcome back if you've been here before. I'm Mafalda, and in this space, I dive deep into all things spiritual awakening, healing, personal and collective growth, higher wisdom, embodiment, and I don't shy away from the real truths that we need to face in order to unlock our liberation. And this video is particularly on topic because I will be addressing the keys, the four keys that have kept humanity stuck in lower levels of consciousness. And these keys are death, sex, money, and power. I did record a video on these topics previously, and I started by naming them. I started by stating that it was by diving deep into them that I truly found God within, that I truly connected with the divine and began my own process of merging with source consciousness and expanding my level of awareness and healing so much of the trauma and wounding that I was carrying in my field. And if you've watched some of my earlier videos, you will know that there was a lot of it. And in this video, I want to continue to address these topics, but I do want to dive even deeper into why they've been considered taboo and why they hold the keys to unlocking our liberation and higher levels of consciousness, not only on a personal level, but also on a collective level. And these topics aren't particularly easy to discuss, but we're here for it. And as you may have already noticed or not, I am not here to shy away from the difficult topics, and I'm not here to give you the sugar-coated version of spirituality, the woo-woo, airy-fairy version of awakening, but rather to dive deep, like I say, regularly into what really needs to be addressed, alchemized, transmuted in order for us to come into alignment with our soul, for us to come into our highest potential, and for us to collectively co-create a much higher timeline for humanity to really bring us into an era that is anchored in the service to all, in the service to the collective, that is unity consciousness, and to lift humanity, to lift this planet out of the thousands of years of service to self that we've been living, that's created devastating consequences, devastating suffering for so many. And yes, I am here to remind us, to remind you, to remind myself that it is possible. It's not only possible, it's happening already. So without further ado, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's delve deep into why death, sex, power, money have been used to keep humanity in a slumber, to keep humanity operating at a much lower level of consciousness than what is rightfully accessible for us, and how we can transmute the distortion within each of these areas within ourselves to lift this slumber, to continuously pierce through the veil of illusion and to align with a harmonious, abundant, prosperous present and future for all, because it's not utopia. It is our birthright. It's our birthright. So let's start with death. And death really lies at the root of it all. Our fear of death is what keeps us stuck, because it's what allows us to be controlled. It's what allows us to be manipulated. Because when you can instill a fear of annihilation, a fear of death, you put human beings in a position where they will sacrifice anything in order to survive. And that isn't life. That is a state of slumber. That is a state of barely managing to keep ourselves alive in the sense of breathing. Because when you can convince us that death is the end, that death is the end of us, we will do anything to stop that from occurring. But when you're able to come into the realization that death is not the end, that there is no end point, because death itself is a process of transformation. Death itself is only a step in this continuous process of change, and that is not only inevitable, but that is the only thing that is permanent, the constant change. You start to live your life very differently. And I can tell you, not only from personal experience, but from what I've been able to observe, that those of us who are not afraid of death, we are free. We are liberated, because we will not trade in our integrity, our well-being, our ability to see, our love, our joy, our truth for anything. That makes us powerful. That makes us a threat to those who wish to keep us in a state where we're constantly running to comply with what we believe is going to secure our survival. Because when you don't fear death, when you realize that death is yet another process of transformation, you won't allow yourself to continuously betray your truth, betray your integrity, accept less than what you deserve. You will not settle for an existence that is based merely on paying bills and complying with systems that do not protect our birthrights. When you don't fear death, you start to live. When you don't fear death, you start to realize what life really is. You realize that nothing is really lost. So when you can convince us that life is all about staying alive in the survival sense of the word, then you will have us continuously chasing that. And when you don't fear the end, when you realize there is no end, that's because you start to identify less with the temporary identity of this life, of this body, of this particular vessel, of this ego. And you start to identify more with the part of you that is eternal, with the part of you that does not die, which is the soul that carries on. And when you start to do that, you start to access, you start to remember. You are no longer looking outside to the systems, the establishment, the authority figures that have been built on this planet over the last few thousands of years to tell you how to live your life, to tell you what's important, to tell you what matters. That compass becomes an inner compass. You look within to know what your next step is. because you're not afraid for your life. So once you're able to unlock that, comes the next step, which is power. If you're not afraid of death, you're not willing to give your power away. And that means you do not hand your sovereignty to other people, whatever that looks like for you on the outside, to external leaders. The leader becomes internal, like I was saying. The compass is internal. The compass is your alignment, your integrity, your values that transcend this human existence. The compass becomes love. It becomes truth. It becomes joy. And when you're living from that place, nothing can be taken away from you because you didn't cling to anything in the first place, because you don't need anything on the outside to validate your existence. You go within. What that does is you're no longer able to be enslaved. And I'll give you an example. If you're not afraid of dying, and I know this may seem extreme, but I really am coming from a place of personal experience I have on my path as a mystic, on my path as a spiritual being. I have faced my death. I have faced situations where my survival was in question. And so I can really tell you from a place of embodied knowing that on the other side of that is divinity, is remembering yourself as a fractal of the divine. Because yes, there is a physical death. I am not denying that. But it often doesn't come in the ways we expect that it will come. And it's often not determined by the factors that we believe will determine it. There is a surrender to control, to wanting to know how and when it's going to happen, and to realizing that the depth to which you've lived is not determined by how long this life was or how long you managed to keep yourself alive, because you may live 90 or 100 years in any given lifetime. But if you were constantly complying with what was expected of you externally because you were placing that leadership outside of yourself, then you didn't truly live. So perhaps it is better to live less time, but to live more fully, to follow one's heart. And that can only be done once you overcome that fear of death. So back to the personal experience of being in situations where I was really asked to choose between following my heart, following my integrity, and sacrificing that for what appeared to be survival. And let's say that's food, shelter, basic needs. And I chose truth. I chose integrity. I chose love. And what I found was God. What I found was that I was not alone, that I was not dependent on the outside, but rather that I was not separate from the outside or the experience I was having, but rather that I was one with life, one with the all. And it's when you recognize that divinity within yourself that you step into that role, power, of realizing that you are not at the mercy of external forces and that you don't have to sacrifice your integrity for the outside to be kind to you and give you what you need to keep yourself alive, because you start to source it from within. What that does is that unlocks a power, a sovereignty within you that you realize you are actually co-creating with life itself. That what's happening in your inner world is inextricably linked with what's manifesting outside of you. And once you start to understand that, you start to become an active participant in the creation of your reality. But you do not unlock that capacity until you have faced the fear of death. Because you must transmute that fear of survival to come out on the other side and realize that there is no end to you. What there might be is change, transformation. Once you come into that level of power and sovereignty, it is very difficult for you to be manipulated. It is very difficult for your sexual energy to be siphoned, because our sexual energy is our life force. It is our creativity. And unlocking our creativity is what allows us to connect with higher wisdom, to think differently, to think of solutions from a place of higher intuition rather than survival. Because when we are thinking of solutions from a place of survival, we're doing so from the lower mind. And the lower mind operates as a linear device that can only look to the past. So it can only hash out solutions based on what's it's experienced. Well, if you want to change, if you want to take a quantum leap, for example, you can't go by what you've experienced so far, because that will just keep creating more of the same. In order to create a different reality, to create a different solution, you must be able to tap into your imagination of what you have not yet seen as possible, that which you don't have evidence in the physical reality for yet. That creativity, that life force is what you need to regain autonomy over. But of course, because humanity has been siphoned, and I don't want to go too deep into by whom, because this is a public platform. Of course, do feel free to reach out to me and to work with me one-to-one if you do want to learn more about this. But humanity has been siphoned, and we have been siphoned through programs of mind control around the fear of death, our fear for our own survival, our victimhood, our lack of sovereignty, lack of power, and our sexual creative life force. Because when you have control over our fear of death, our fear of annihilation, our view of death, and therefore our view of life, you can take over our power, and then it becomes very easy to control our sexual energy, our creativity, our life force through trauma, repression. This is done through a variety of mediums: overstimulation, guilt, shame, religion, sexual objectification, nowadays pornography. I mean, you name it. What that does is we start to leak our energy rather than cultivate it and channel it into the creation, the birthing of the new, of whatever we want to bring forth into the world. Which leads me to money, of course, because money, our money system is a system of value, of course. It is the medium of exchange that we have determined expresses value in our society. But of course, when our fulfillment or the fulfillment of our basic needs, like food, shelter, depends on what we have, on how much money we have as a resource, we go from the enoughness of our power, of our life force, to the enoughness of what we have. We go from, am I good enough? Do I have enough to keep myself alive? Do I have enough of this medium of exchange that is required in order for me to obtain the things that I need to keep myself alive? Again, a survival that is based on the external. So whatever I need to survive is out there, and I need to go and get it. So when you create a system, when you create a money system that has inbuilt scarcity, and I will go deeper into this topic in future videos. Do let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do so. Then, of course, you will create competition. That's one of the basic principles of modern economy. You will put us at odds with each other because we feel like we need to compete for this scarce resource that is essential for our survival. So you can keep us in loops of lack, of needing to accumulate this resource in order to feel safe and secure. So you can see how these 4 areas, starting with the fear of death right at the root chakra, and of course, power, sex, and money lie within the sacral chakra. They're all the same area within our energy field, our energy system. When you have control of these 4 areas, you can keep humanity stuck in a fear of death and a survival-based reality. The fear of survival, or the drive to survive, becomes so great that we cannot access or unlock any of the upper chakras, which are actually what will allow for our greater abilities, a much more expansive existence, divine connection, love, truth, voice, expression, which are all the things that make this life worth living, that unlock more of our potential. So if you can keep us stuck in those lower chakras, if you can distort that, if you can have control over our own access to that energy, you can keep us enslaved within our own minds. And then our existence becomes a mere race to pay bills, secure a roof over our heads, and manage to fulfill our basic needs. So unlocking these 4 keys, diving deep into these 4 areas, is crucial to liberate yourself, to access more of your conscious potential and awareness, and to realize that you've been living within a fraction of what's available to you. And this is in the interest of those who feed the paradigm of the service to self, the service to ego. Because once you start to realize that you can have access to your own life force, that you can have access to your own divinity within, that you do not need to live a life based on the fear of your own annihilation, you start to realize that reality is much more bendable than perhaps you once thought, and that you have much more of a say in how it goes, not from your egoic mind, but from the level of your soul and your higher self. You become the active participant. And once that happens, you cannot be controlled. You cannot be manipulated, like I said at the beginning of the video. So of course, it's not in the interest of those who have upheld the paradigm of the service to self. But that doesn't mean it's not possible. That doesn't mean it's not true. That doesn't mean that we do not have free will. It's just that we must gain access to it by healing the distortion in each of these areas that can go very deep. And I wonder if that's something that you'd like me to go deeper into, any of these 4 areas. Do let me know. Please let me know in the comments if you resonate with this message. It is quite profound, so I will be breaking this up into different sections and different topics. But this is definitely what I'm called to do, to assist us in piercing through the veil of illusion, that we are more limited than we think we are, and that we don't have the right to live an abundant, prosperous, loving, expansive, truthful existence in alignment with our true soul, that we don't deserve to experience joy at a deep, deep level, to smile from within, no matter what. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, do reach out to me in the comments. I love reading your responses and whether or not you feel in resonance with these transmissions. Don't hesitate to drop me a comment. Do reach out to me if you wish to work on a more personal level in healing the wounds that are within each of these areas within your field specifically. And of course, if you have any questions as well, do let me know. I send you all a big, big hug and lots of love on your journey. And you will definitely be seeing me very, very soon in the next video.